Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Essential Pause, a podcast about finding meaning, intention, and presence in the small spaces of our everyday lives. I'm Carey, and with each episode, we explore the power of essential pauses, moments that help us reset, reflect, and reconnect with ourselves and others. Through stories, reflection, and practical practices, my hope is to invite you to slow down, listen differently, and cultivate the stamina to show up more fully to your life and leadership. And I'm super excited. I feel like we have an expert in the pause industry, maybe. Jesse Tubbs is here. He is a retired U.S. Army musician and the founder of Grit Adventures, an experiential learning program that uses adventure racing to teach resilience, mindfulness, and teamwork. He designs and facilitates team development events and workshops for sports teams, corporations, youth organizations, and veterans. As the lead curriculum designer and meditation instructor for Complete Focus, Jesse also helps students and professionals build mental clarity and focus through mindfulness and breath work. Jesse is also an ICF certified coach, positive intelligence mental fitness coach, and former master resiliency trainer in the U.S. Army. Jesse draws on nearly 2 decades of experience in endurance racing, including competing in Amazon Prime's Eco Challenge Fiji to inspire others to unlock their potential, strengthen their mindset, and thrive under pressure. Jesse, it's so good to see you.
You too. It's been a while, and I'm grateful to be.
It has been a while. Jesse and I had the pleasure of meeting in our coach training. So it was fun to connect with you. And I was so excited when I, invited folks to come on that you were interested in coming on. So I always like to start the pod, Jesse, with definitions, because I feel like you say words and people have all sorts of beliefs and assumptions around, what that word might mean or in the context of their own lives. And so I'm curious, when you think about the word pause, or when you saw my post about essential pause, what comes up for you?
The way you described your podcast pretty much sums it up. Right?
Okay.
It's creating that space of stillness to gain a little bit of clarity, or hopefully a lot of clarity, about what is most needed in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I think the 2 most important qualities that are gained through that capacity of pausing is having awareness and acceptance for our experience. And for me, those are the 2 most important and pivotal steps in any process of navigating any challenges that we're experiencing, is that acceptance or that awareness, right, of what's happening. And then just having graceful and compassionate acceptance for our experience.
Yeah.
We're bringing to the table with what other people are bringing to the table and with the situation that we happen to be in.
Yeah. So it's not on our question list. So if you don't mind, I'm going to throw you a question that just came up as I was listening to you. Because I look at your record, you were in the military, you've done a lot of really hard, mental and physical challenges. I'm wondering, at what point did something like pausing, this idea of awareness and acceptance, become a thing for you? Because we often think about racing and competition as push through, get through, toughen it out, right? And I'm just wondering, when did pause become important for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, so I'll start by describing the sport that I do. It's adventure racing, it's mountain biking, trekking, canoeing, rappelling, and you have a map and compass, and you often work in teams of 4 to find checkpoints. You choose your route, you decide which path you're going to do, or sometimes which order you're going to get the checkpoints. And what you pointed to was an essential part of my growth as an endurance athlete, because as I started out, I was young and competitive and fast, and I was sometimes the fastest person on the course, but I was going the wrong way. I wasn't taking the time to check and redouble my assumptions. And this idea of slow is fast or smooth is fast is a concept that is very applicable to adventure racing. And especially early on when I was not the navigator and I'd be on teams with people who are more experienced than I I'd get so frustrated because we'd stop. We were mountain biking, gunning down a hill, and we'd stop at an intersection and the navigator would look and I was like, what are we doing? We're wasting time. And I would just get so caught in frustration and annoyance. And then more times than not, when that would happen, the navigator would say, oh, we actually do need to take a right here. Had we continued on, we would have gone another mile down this hill to only then realize our mistake and come back up. And you'll see there's a fascinating thing that happens with adventure racing now, because all the teams have trackers, so you can see their route.
Oh, they're like dots and
so you
stuff.
see all these little bonus miles, all these little out and backs that happen with teams that don't pause, that don't take the time to assess accurately and efficiently what is needed in that moment. And I speak to this in my workshops and presentations a lot, where I spent a lot of time developing this physical resilience in this one space, right? I was able to do harder and harder and longer things. And it was siloed in that space. So I would go and do a multi-day race, come back, and I would lose my mind because my kids left their toys out, or someone would cut me off and I'd flip them off and I'd lose all control to maintain myself. And there's a long story that I tell that I won't tell here about going to the Grand Canyon with some buddies of mine, running the rim to rim to rim. So 50 miles from the south end to north and back, and I get back to work on Monday and my boss holds us over by 10 minutes and I'm losing my mind. Right. And this whole experience of running, I was with people who were faster than I was, and I just suffered tremendously during that experience. But I couldn't sit for 10 minutes in an air conditioned environment and listening to somebody talk. And that's when it really hit me.
Yeah.
This resilience that I developed stays siloed in that space. And it's only by transferring the resilience and the experiencing lessons from the physical space into my home life and work life that I began to become more resilient in other areas. And this idea of pausing is at the core of all of it, because without the pause, then you can't know which direction to go.
Yeah. I love that visual of thinking about watching the teams and the trackers and like the bonus miles, because then you apply that to like life and the things you do. And it's like, oh my goodness, all the time and space we sort of veer off because we didn't say, oh, it's actually a right here and not straight down the hill, right? So that you're backtracking. That's such a good visual. I too am an athlete, so all the things you're saying really resonate with me. As I was sort of preparing for our talk today and looking at your website, it seems to me, and it makes sense, that like not everybody that comes to you as a client or as a group are doing adventure races in the same way that you are. So I'm wondering, like, how do you bridge that? You know, not everybody's an athlete, not everybody is interested in competing, not everybody, they're doing other things. So like, how do you find that, like, I don't know, like a common denominator or a motivation for these folks? Like, how do you translate that to folks who aren't doing the kinds of things you're doing in adventure racing?
You are pointing to the core of the issue that I contended with when I created the program 5 years ago. It started as a program for kids to use adventure racing as this vehicle for teaching these emotional and mental resiliency skills, mindfulness-based things. So how do I take this long-form expedition experience struggle and challenge and make it into a concentrated experience that creates the same somatic feeling and an experience of stress and overwhelm that we feel in life, but in this sort of artificially stressful, low stakes environment. And what I found quickly was that it doesn't take steeping in this experience in order to summon up these physical reactions, that you can do it in a very short period of time. And so what I would do is I send these kids out working in teams, teach them how to navigate. Then they'd go get lost and they would yell at each other and they'd have all the things. And we teach them all these conflict resolution skills, emotional regulation, all these things. And sometimes they'd be successful, sometimes they wouldn't, but we'd come back and debrief and talk about, okay, we learned this technique. You tried it out. This worked, this didn't. How does that show up at home? How does that show up at work, with your friends or school? And even when I do workshops now, so I recently did a workshop at Frostburg State. I was awarded a grant to bring a mindfulness program to the university. And I did these 2-hour workshops, and 45 minutes of it was them using a map to find 3 checkpoints on campus. And each checkpoint was a different team challenge that tied into the lesson content that we were talking about. And again, it wasn't physically grueling, right? So it wasn't the hunger and the sleep deprivation and all the things that I experienced, but it was the same sort of stress and anxiety or pressure of trying to be the first team to try to overcome these challenges. And each of the challenges, again, one was a more mental challenge, one was a physical challenge. And I create the challenges to elicit different strengths and weaknesses in a team so that there's an engagement, there's a conversation about how do you empower your team in order to overcome or complete these challenges. And what I find is that even in these play-based mini adventure experiences, that there is a lot of juice to squeeze out of it, right? Again, it creates a mini version of what I experience. And the other thing I'll just say real quick is because I do these in urban environments or park environments or even in convention spaces, I can generally get an understanding of what the physical capabilities are or the adventure tolerance. So last year I facilitated an adventure experience for this organization in Pennsylvania called I Am Able Foundation, and they service people with physical and mental disabilities. So I was able to create a course that was appropriate for their capabilities and their limitations. And so there's a way to increase, like that, turn up and turn down the dial of the adventure and challenge based on the group.
That's such a nice example to compare to the college students on the campus and then the youth that you sent out in teams. As you're designing curriculum, and then I'm thinking about sort of applying this to life, are you seeing, it's not pain points, but you mentioned like when you're on an adventure race, it's sleep deprivation, it's you're hungry, your muscles are sore, and then maybe you're lost. I'm wondering like, what are the sort of factors or variables that you're turning up and down for these different groups, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I focus on is this idea of teamwork. Okay. And typically, if you're in a team, and I'm sure we've all had this experience either at school or at work where we do a team project, a group project, and like one person will take charge and they'll do everything. There's no delegation or somebody who slacks off and doesn't do anything. And so there's frustration on both levels. And so it's figuring out how to frame the experience with the people who are doing the adventure experience or the workshop in this idea that it is your responsibility in this, again, low stakes environment, right? Sort of play this sandbox, right? That nobody has any ego around it because nobody's done this before. And so everybody's coming to it with a beginner mindset. And you frame it from this idea of your task is to empower everybody to work to their fullest capability, to engage in discussions about what people's comfort levels are, what they feel like their capabilities are. And when I create some of these challenges, it really is intentional. Like sometimes I really turn up the mental side of things because I understand that there's some people who are just more mentally, they enjoy the mental stimulation, and some people who really love the physical stimulation. So I'll have sandbags or kettlebells or burpees, or other things to let those people shine and come forward with their strengths.
Got it.
And so then we talk about that. Okay, when you're at home or when you're at work, when I do corporate events for teams, it's this idea of like, how do you have these discussions with your colleagues, your leaders, your managers or subordinates that allows for people to feel empowered and engaged and part of the team. And then, I mean, all the things you talked about, the sleep deprivation, the hunger, those are all individual experiences. Yeah. Ultimately, it's a team's responsibility to ensure that individual gets through the course.
Because that's true in an adventure race, right? You all have to finish together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so framing the more mini adventure experiences in that same way, that it's your job to get your team through the course as quickly as possible. And that only happens when everybody's working at their fullest capacity.
Yeah, that's very cool. So you mentioned when I asked you about your definition of pause and we talked about your experiences in adventure racing, you mentioned you were going fast and going the wrong way. I even wrote down Phil Maffetone because he talks about that you go slow to go fast, the marathon training idea. So if you take that, it sounds like you value the pause, the importance of that moment. Where does that fit into getting all your teammates across the finish line and the conflict that you have as a team as you're looking for the checkpoint? Like, how do you infuse that sort of lesson or value or strategy into those moments for folks?
So I teach the pause.
Okay.
Here's this technique. Okay. I call it the mindset reset.
Okay.
And those of you who know the positive intelligence program, is the PQ reps or cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the sensory pathways into presence. So it's touch, sight, sound, and breath. And I give them a short example. So that this is the idea of connection before content. I give them a real life example of it. I ask them to think about a recent time where they were challenged or triggered, maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10, nothing super important or stressful, but something that is just kind of mildly annoying. But there's still some emotional residue around. And then I lead them through like a 2-minute meditation. So I invite them to really embody, really bring up the thoughts and sensations that they either had or still have about the experience. And then I have them just rub their thumb and forefinger together and bring their full awareness to that sense of touch and the sense of sound, breath, and sight. And then I ask them after the 2 minutes, so that was a really quick visualization. Like, how do you feel now after just 2 minutes of this? And almost everybody says, wow, I feel so much calmer. I can't believe like what I thought was so important, like completely diminishes or has diminished. And so I teach that tool as an essential part of navigating through the emotional landscape as they're going through the physical landscape. So as they're going through a challenge, I invite them to check in with their internal experience. Maybe they're feeling frustrated that their team's not moving as fast as they want to, or they're frustrated that somebody's kind of hogging the navigation or whatever. And just to take note of that, to do a reset while they're in that experience. So they're learning the skill, applying the skill directly in that adventure-based experience. And then we talk about, okay, so here's where you were able to successfully apply that or integrate that. And then this is why this skill is so important, because when you go back to work or at home, you can use these same techniques to just turn down the intensity of the experience. And I'm very clear that these resets don't eliminate. It doesn't go from 7 to 0. Yeah. It just goes from like 7 to 4 or 3. But that pause, doing that is like walking around with your glasses fogged up. You can't see really clearly. All the reset does is just wipes the fog away a little bit, so you have a little bit more clarity, a little bit more perspective of what needs to happen in that moment. And that goes back to the awareness and acceptance piece. But it just gives you a little bit more clarity, a little bit more space to maneuver in that situation so that you are really being intentional about how you're responding versus reacting. And I have a whole thing about responding versus reacting metaphor that I talk about. But yeah, I'm clear about introducing that pause concept before they go to the adventure experience so they can test it out.
Yeah. So you mentioned it's like sort of wiping the fog off of your glasses a little bit so you have a little bit more clarity. I'm wondering, because I feel like when we talked prior to recording, I feel like I remember you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the other thing that happens, or one other thing that can happen, is the time that it takes someone to reset, right? So you're not only is it sort of increasing clarity, but perhaps the amount of time you need for the reset, does that get smaller and smaller as you get sort of better at this practice or more attuned to this practice?
I talk about developing this skill in 3 ways or 3 dimensions. And one dimension is just growing the muscle to catch yourself more often, right? Just the beginning, because oftentimes it's the awareness that something needs to be addressed that is the first and most important step, right? Yeah. Alcoholics Anonymous, the first step is just to recognize there's a problem, right? Yeah. So one of the grow work or the assignments that I give to people is just to count how many times they start. That they can catch themselves. That in and of itself is a mark of progress when you can catch yourself more frequently. The second is how wide can you make that space? How between stimulus and response, right? The Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and freedom. And I kind of go in depth in in my workshops when I really take that apart. The idea is that we're growing that space. So that we get really triggered, and then we sort of are aware that we're triggered, right? The first of the awareness piece. And then we're able to lengthen the time between that event and when we say or do something. And so growing that capacity. And then the third way that they can grow capacity or measure progress is the level of challenge, where we might start off with a 3 or 4 out of 10. Eventually, like going to the gym, and that's why I call myself a mental fitness coach, is because I use that metaphor a lot, is you practice it little and often, right? So you increase the capacity a little bit, little by little, and you practice it often enough. So it's a skill that your brain, literally the neural pathways, right? The connections end up creating that muscle memory.
I knew there was a duration piece to it. I just wasn't articulating it. It's so interesting, Jesse, because I do a lot of work with clients and other folks around discomfort, right? Which is related, but different. And so I love hearing what you're saying, because I always am talking about noticing and naming are the first steps. And then the other pieces of the work that I do with folks is practicing in that space and building what I've started calling discomfort stamina. So your ability to sort of manage, right? And the same thing, like you practice in very low risk, like something that's just uncomfortable, to the sort of higher risk discomfort. And if you've done enough practice in the low risk, you maybe get yourself, more fit, if you will, for those others. So it's so interesting. I love that we're sort of sharing ideas with a different way of coming at it. So that's very cool. I'm curious, like, talk to me a little bit about what do you see as people are coming back? Because not everybody buys into quickly this idea of pausing. A lot of people are, I think for some athletes, it feels very counterintuitive, as you sort of shared in your early. So like, what are you seeing? The other thing let me start there. What are you seeing in folks who go through the trainings or the courses that you create?
That's why I really doubled down on this connection before content idea. It's a framework of the experiential education world.
Mm-hmm.
And you prove to them, because it's one thing to just sort of talk at people and to talk about, in abstract terms about the benefits of meditation and breathing. And we've all heard the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all know that eating junk food is bad for you and all the things, right? There's a whole list of things that we know intellectually that we're not supposed to be doing that we do all the time.
Yeah.
And that's why I try to give them a direct experience so that it's not coming from this place of other. One of the phrases that I heard in my mindfulness mentor training sessions was be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage.
Yeah.
And I'm really clear about talking about how this is stuff that I still work through and am developing and applying to myself so that it's not coming from this idea of like, just follow me, just do these things and I'll be right. That I'm along with you. I'm going to experience this with you. I'm going to show you what it feels like. Here's the benefit in this micro dose, in this 2-minute meditation, and to hook them, to entice them to then want to experience it further on their own. And what I hear often when I get feedback from doing these workshops is that they didn't realize how easy it was or how quickly these things could be applied. Because a lot of times we hear, well, you have to meditate. And so I think there's this concept that you have to sit down for 10 or 15, 30 minutes in the morning. And then if we don't do that, then it's not going to be useful. But these resets can be done in a matter of seconds. And then I teach a more long form way of marinating in challenging situations. But again, it all boils down to proving it to them, demonstrating, having them experience it for themselves rather than me just telling them and having them believe.
Yeah, that's right. Because even the strategies or the ideas that you pose, like we all have our own way of doing things. And so, right. So like, a 2-minute might work for 80% of the folks in the group, but maybe somebody needs 2.5 minutes or something. Right. So like learning it for themselves and what they need. That's really cool. I'm wondering, so you do some learning, you do the 2-minute to hook them. They go out and do the adventure, the course you have set up, and there's a debrief. I have to ask though, like when they're in the adventure, are you and maybe others on your team like out there providing, like in teaching, we call it scaffolding, right? So like some supports while they're out there, or do you just like let them go and they do what they can and trial and error? Like, what does that look like out on the course with you as the guide on the side, so to speak?
So I'll use the example of the Frostburg State.
Yeah.
It was a 2-hour workshop. 55 minutes of it, just under an hour, was this introduction. Introduce the concepts. We talk about the mindset reset, the 4A framework of how to process through the more challenging experiences and all these ideas. And then I send them out on the course.
Yeah. And
I frame this experience as, again, this is an opportunity for you to practice these resets and these mindfulness techniques we talked about. And this is your breakout session. This is a chance, an opportunity for each team to talk as they're traveling from checkpoint to checkpoint, what came up for them. So they come up with their own powerful questions. And I offer a couple options, like what comes up for you? How does this challenge relate to a concept that we talked about? What's something you're taking away from this? How do you envision this showing up in your life? Like how does this particular challenge, how is this a metaphor for something that you experience in life? And what I find is that, and there's a lot of science to back this up, that walking, whether it's in nature or not, and oftentimes even on Frostburg State or even when I do it in convention spaces, there's trees and there's nature-ish qualities, right? Nature adjacent things that elicit similar sort of somatic experiences of feeling, because you're not inside with fluorescent lighting and all that. So, and there's something to be said for walking and talking. Right? Part of our brains are engaged in scanning, and so the filters are down a little bit, and we're more open to talking when we're talking alongside somebody, as opposed to directly. Like there's less tension or there's maybe we're more vulnerable.
Sure.
Oftentimes those conversations in between checkpoints and then as they're coming back into the space are some of the most meaningful conversations they have, and much more powerful than if they were just go on their table and talk for 5 minutes. Yeah. And so I don't find that I need to do a lot of scaffolding around it. And the other thing I'll say about that is sometimes I will intentionally pair questions on because they find these orange and white orienteering flags. Okay. When you get the flag, there's a little laminated sheet that explains the checkpoint. Sometimes I'll intentionally put 1 or 2 questions on the sheet for them to discuss. Okay. So it sort of depends on the group, but that will also give them some intentional framing for that experience.
Yeah. What's that say about you as a facilitator? It feels like you have a lot of trust in the folks coming to you.
That's a good question. Trust or laziness? I don't.
No way, laziness.
I don't know. Well, So, Jen Lara, we both know her. Yeah. She has been an incredible mentor to me as a facilitator, and as I've learned I'm learning how to be in this space, and even through the coaching program that she created, I feel like the real wisdom is always gleaned from the client, right? Yeah. And if you just provide the opportunity and the space for people to extrapolate or extract the wisdom and the insights for themselves, then you don't have to tell. Right. You don't have to direct. And there's a book called Play by Stuart Brown, where he talks about the importance of play as a species. We've evolved hundreds of thousands of years to process and interpret and take meaning through play as we develop as adolescents. And we've gotten away from that as adults typically. And what I've witnessed, both as a participant and as a facilitator, is that whenever play is involved, that just opens up communication and doors and things that don't happen if you're reading a book or someone's just directively spewing information at you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, Jesse, it's been such a pleasure to hear more about your work and to reconnect. And I'm just excited to see, where you take all this wonderful things that you're doing. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. This has been another episode of Essential Pause. I'm your host, Carey Borkowski. Be well and take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you just heard, we have a whole universe of podcasts waiting for you. Simply search Dragon Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. You can also explore our full lineup and discover new shows at podbean.com/dragonpodcasts. That's podbean.com/dragonpodcasts.